Yeah, we're all here, right?
Yep.
All
Yeah.
right, so I'm gonna lead up the meeting this morning. So I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order at 8:02. Um, I'm at the wrong agenda. Hold on a minute. Okay. Um, so we first item is to approve the prior minutes from the January 7th and February 6th meetings. Any comments, edits, or suggestions on those? No? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes as submitted?
Aye.
Okay, all approved. Thank you. Our next item is new business, Polson HVAC, electrical, auditorium, and gym improvements. Who wants to take the lead on that one?
I got you covered.
Okay,
So I'm going to kind of monopolize this meeting a little bit as we run through this, but we'll call in Nick as needed, and then Kristen's here from BL filling in for Jesse who's on vacation. But wanted to just kind of give everybody an update on where we are in the process, but most importantly, I want to work through some of the construction estimates. And full disclosure up front, how far I was off from my initial slate that I put together for the committee, but start at the ending. Good news is, we can afford to do this. Can afford to do this phase one of work. So basically, where we've been since the last time we met and had a quorum was BL had a third party estimator put together their estimate for this phase one. They have finished their construction documents and actually they just delivered to us their bid documents. So the project phase one of this project is actually ready. Um, Gilbane, as part of their pre-construction services, their team went and did an estimate as well using those construction documents, completely independent from each other. They have promised me they didn't include at all, even though it looks like it, because their estimates were very, very close, which is a good thing. They were like a couple $100,000 off. So what we did back in, I think it was early February, we met in Gilbane's office and the two estimating crews came together and we hacked through this thing line by line by line by line. And as basically what happens in that process is anytime that the two estimates were off by we were using like 10% or $10,000 as a metric, the two estimating crews would kind of justify themselves to each other, and then we either pick one, pick the other, or compromise somewhere in the middle. But what it did was make sure like everybody's looking at this the same way because that's obviously what the marketplace is going to do when we put this out to bid. So it's a really good team effort, and Gilbane then went back and did what was called a reconciled estimate, where they took all those adjustments, and where we landed at this was 18,317,305. Now that is what I call a fully loaded project cost. That has everything in there from direct construction costs to escalation through the midpoint of construction. It has pre-con in it. It has CM fees in it. It's everything. So that is the total cost. Now, if you recall, our project budget was around 21 million for our whole slate of projects, which we were hoping to do over 4 years. And again, this number is being as conservative as possible. We don't want to run into a problem like we won't name names, but some other projects in town that are the bids came back way over estimate. We don't want that to be the case here. So if you don't mind, I will share my screen because what I put together is a comparison on the same format that we worked through when we first started meeting as a team that showed this slate of projects, kind of where I thought the numbers were going to land and where they actually did. Is that okay with you guys to do that?
that's great. Thank you.
Okay, let me get this going. All right. Did you guys see that spreadsheet here?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna make it a little bigger because it's got a lot of columns, and then I'll focus it on one. So the way this is structured, this has the same information. Again, that the first couple columns here has the what we're calling the sub project. So year one is what we're looking at now. Year one is what was designed, and it has those 5 sub projects in it. Adding the cooling to the classrooms not currently cooled, replacing the HVAC in the classrooms that are cooled, renovating the gym, electrical upgrades and generator, and auditorium. So column D was the number that I provided in October, which was kind of my target based on a bunch of past projects and not really fully understanding the scope of each one of these lines. And we were still at that point reconfiguring this project. And I was hoping that we were going to come in around 11 million. So how do we get from 11 million to 8 million? That's almost embarrassing. I don't think I've ever been off that much in a budget in my life. So I started breaking this down into the various sub projects to see where because so Gilbane and BL's estimate is not wrong. So it was just a matter of how did we go from there to here. Um, Column F shows Gilbane's, it's right here. This is Gilbane's what I call direct cost. So one of the things is most of the projects that I've worked on in this list didn't have a CM overseeing everything. We were contracting with what would be called like the prime contractor or the GC on part of the job. This project, because we're executing so many different projects at one time in such a tight window, we need a Gilbane on board to do this, which is why we hired him. So their cost, this kind of 11 million lines up more with their 14, which is what I'm calling direct costs only. So this column you can see here, we're about 3 million off the direct cost. Still not great, but it explains it somewhat. Column I here is if you took that direct costs and you allocated what are all the kind of overhead costs on the project. There's about 25% of indirect costs. So that's the 2% CM fee. That's estimated general conditions, which may change a little bit. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is escalation. This is added contingency. This is everything else above and beyond the direct contractors working on the job. So if you add that, I did an allocation based on the direct cost value, and it ends up with column J, which is Gilbane's 18.3 estimate. So the variance in column K is if you take what Gilbane's estimate is, reconciled estimate for the project all in, versus what I originally thought the project was going to be, or that part of the project was going to be, and the difference. So again, they're off. And so I dug into each one and said, why? Why are we this far off? Because this is based on projects that we've actually done. So the biggest one that we were off on a percentage, actually, let me stop there. Any questions on how this is lined up for analysis before we get into the reasons why?
Not yet, no.
All right, let's dive in. So we're going to focus on, and I'll send this to you guys after the meeting as well, on the narrative here. So we met yesterday to go through this because the VRF system, adding the cooling to the classrooms, this was one that I was really, the only one of these estimates that we didn't talk through and be like, nope, makes perfect sense at first was this one, because I've done these projects on a large scale over a couple of years and was using actual data. But there are a couple of unique things to this project where as the project evolved, were added or changed or were just different from the ones I've done in the past. One is we're using a system where we have two cassettes in each classroom. So what that means is every classroom has two, they call them indoor units, which hang up in the ceiling, which distribute the air uniformly throughout the classroom. The projects that I've done in the past, that's how we always wanted to do it. And budget constraints only allowed us to do wall hung units, which is what you would see like in your house if you had those mini split systems in your house. They work, they're okay. By far, the better way to do it is with the cassettes. You get a much better airflow. You don't get the hot and cold spots. You don't get the ugly piping across the wall. It's definitely the way to go. Another thing was that this project, I think we talked about this before, requires significant electrical modifications in this building to make this happen. So we have to run new electrical panels, rather large panels throughout the building to feed this equipment. Another difference is we're putting all of this equipment on the roof. The ones I've done in the past, we've put the equipment outside. This building really isn't, I mean, outside of the ground. This job really isn't conducive to do that. We have all this equipment on the roof. You have to run power up there. So there's a lot of costs involved in that. There also are sections of the building that I think we talked about this a little last time. We have to remove entire sections of ceiling in the hallway spaces, and we're going to replace those ceilings. So that's an add in here. But again, lead you to a much more aesthetically pleasing project. Another thing is the unit costs, just equipment alone. Gilbane actually received a quote from Train, that, budget quote of $620,000 just for the equipment. So that's significantly higher than it was even just a year or two ago. So again, this is almost the smallest of all the sub projects, but definitely had the biggest variance between those two. Um, the other ones we get into, so the next item are the classrooms where we're just replacing the units in these penthouses. So this one took a very big turn from what we thought as we went through this design process. Even though on a direct cost basis, as you see here, but my estimate was actually a little bit higher than when you load it all up, that the construction estimate kind of jumps over it. But if you recall, we were originally thinking that there were 12 units up on the roof that served these areas. And that's what we based our budget off of. That's because BL didn't really spend any time budgeting or designing based on what was there, because at the time it didn't matter what was there. We were going to put all new stuff in a whole different configuration. So if you recall, as we dug into this, we found, wow, these aren't 12 units up here. These penthouses actually house 43 different units, all fueling all these different zones, in 9 penthouses, and then 3 standalone rooftop units. So a whole different system than we thought. But what was nice was, as we kind of went through this process, we're like, well, the system as it is now actually works great. I mean, the stuff is dying, but the actual setup of it works great. But a little bit more expensive to retrofit. We actually looked at replacing the penthouses as a whole and not just the guts inside each one, hoping to save on installation because of that. And BL did a lot of good work with the vendor that actually built these systems to begin with. And we decided that the most cost-effective thing was to actually just replace in kind all the units that are in there, clean up the penthouses. But again, there is a lot of new electrical that's required as well. So that kind of explains that one. That one really took a turn. Next one up in line is the gym. So we had about 950 grand, and then fully loaded, we came in at 1.7 for the gym. The gym was definitely another one that in the design, the system got a lot more complex. So my initial thoughts when we were talking about the gym was putting a couple rooftop units on the roof, and we're done. There were structural issues at play there. BL's team spent a lot of work on this gym system. We talked a little bit about it in these meetings, trying to find a system that, one, was aesthetically pleasing. We didn't have units sitting right out where you could see them from the parking lot. We needed good airflow in the gym. We had structural to deal with. We didn't want to rip apart adjacent spaces to add new structural steel. But at the end of all of that, we settled on what I think is a really good system, where the only interior space we're going to impact is the weight room area next to it, which we could do in the summer and add structural bracing in there. And the units are going to go on top of that. I believe there's 2 of them. And then we run them up and into the gym. You won't see anything from the parking lot, and will give really good airflow to the gym. So that the complexity of that system went from, the 500 I was thinking for an RTU to over 850 in direct cost for that. But again, that's the right system for the space. Everything else in that gym is kind of, there's bleachers are a big component. The bleachers we were right on budget with. We contacted vendors on that. We have pretty solid pricing on it. I think the estimate is going to reflect the actual. I had put a budget in for 150 grand for the flooring and all the miscellaneous work in the gym. The estimators carried that at 250. Okay, we're only 100 off. I'd rather be, have a little bit more of a cushion there when we dig into all the miscellaneous work in the gym. That's padding, that's the lighting, that's the painting of the entire space, refinishing the floor, all that type of work. So that kind of the explanation for that. Getting into the electrical was, we had about $3 million because that was the grant. Fully loaded, we're at 4.2. All in all, and with a direct cost, we were actually almost our numbers almost matched completely. That's a good thing. We want to max that grant out. So what we did was said, how much could we push in this project into that portion that's going to be funded by the Department of Energy grant? So originally, my number was pulled right out of the value engineering schedule, which was 2.5 million. So that was a number I really didn't come up with myself. But we wanted to push as much as we can into that line to maximize the grant. Ton of electrical work happening with this job. This is upgrading the main switchgear to the building. This is the new generator. This is all the new service. We're building this whole system in a room off the kitchen, so we can keep the building live. We're doing this project in a way where the building's not going to have a massive amount of downtime. We're hoping one shutdown in the summer gets for a couple weeks, gets us tied over to our new service. So again, we did as much as we can to push into that line. And the last space was the auditorium. So the auditorium, we originally had a budget of there was a budget of 1.9 that was in that value engineering schedule that was in place when I onboarded here. So I had taken that number, put in 400 for HVAC, 300 for the ceiling and stage. If you recall, we want to abate the ceiling, get all the hazardous materials out of there. Um, but this was another one where as we got into really designing, we didn't want to design an auditorium that was just going to have some lipstick on it. We wanted to like, let's do this right. This is our chance to make this a showpiece and not have to address the auditorium again. So as we got into this, the auditorium HVAC was another really complex one. There's 282,000 just in steel and dunnage. That's all on the roof. That's the support for this HVAC unit that's going to feed the auditorium. So, and just that alone totaled close to $900,000, which was a little bit more than we were thinking. The ceiling and stage came in around 400. I had 300. Okay. But the rest of it were miscellaneous added details to really arrive at a complete job. So, for example, little things. The stage wasn't going to be addressed at all. Now the stage is going to get stripped down. We have an allowance to replace any wood in there, new finishes put in. There are these old storage closets on the sides of the gym that house an old divider. We're going to get rid of those, clean the whole space up, all new curtains, new lighting, AV. That was always part of the job. But this is where Kristen really played a role in this and has built a very nice design for this auditorium with all the AV, getting rid of all the hazardous building materials in the space, and really making a showpiece and something that we're going to be proud to use throughout town. Um, Again, that came with a price. So. All in all, like I said, we are pretty far off. I was far off of 7 million, but here's the beauty of the plan that we started with down this road is this is a super conservative estimate. Like we hope for this project to come in well under this estimate, and any dollar we save here just goes right back into the future year's project. So even at this stage, our construction budget, that's a number up here with the return of the money from Neck River, which I'm told is still happening, is 21 million. Even if it didn't, we could still afford this phase. It will leave leftover to push into our year two. You recall our year two projects were abatement throughout the school of flooring and a new roof. So if all goes well and this project comes in under budget, we could still do phase two. So the takeaway from all this, our conservative estimate is 18 million. We have the money to move forward with this. Year one was our priority. Everything else was nice to have with leftover funding. But we are ready to roll if you guys are. And maybe we talk about this first, and then we could get into the next steps in a minute.
Thank you, Ben. Um, Galen, do you want to go first?
Um, nope, I don't have anything to say right now. Thanks.
Okay. So Ben, I guess, so you say if this comes under budget, we can still do everything else, but what if it doesn't? Can we still do everything else?
Yeah, so I don't think we're going to be able to do everything else. So right now, if we take our 21 million construction budget and say this project maxes out the 18.3, that would leave us with $3 million left over. So that would allow us to tackle we could either decide to tackle the abatement in year two of all the flooring, or we could tackle the local share for the roof, or maybe what we end up doing is putting some capital improvement money into it. Because what we'll do is we'll reestablish some of these projects. The roof is already in there in our capital plan and supplement it with that. So instead of removing all of the future years from our capital plan, we would just keep them in our capital plan instead of knocking them out with this bond funding. So my hope at this point would be the project comes under budget enough or under that 18 million enough, where we could at least knock out our year two projects, which is the roof and abatement, and then our year three, which were ceilings, lighting, windows, and then our classroom refreshers in year four. We could, by that time, we're far enough down the road where we could build those projects back into our capital improvement plan and fund them through other measures.
And then do we have a clear priority list on that? I mean, abatement first, then the roof. Is that the
Yeah, so
story?
those two, so we had prioritized based on where they were in the year schedule. So those two were like of equal priority. I would say at this point, I'd probably go because we are doing so much abatement in this project now, not in the hallways or the classrooms, but I'd probably go with the roof because the roof is in really rough shape. So I think a really good outcome for us would be to have enough money left to do the roof. Another thing that's important to note is we had in year three our ceilings and lighting. But a lot of that is actually going to get done this year or in this phase now, because as I mentioned, to do this VRF, we have to pull a lot of the corridor ceilings out. So what we did in this project, we're like, well, if we're taking the corridor ceilings out, we're not going to put in the old stuff back in and the
Right.
old lighting back in. So we're actually we're knocking some year three stuff out in year one.
And there's no other variable that could cause another cost overrun that you know of?
Not to that degree.
Okay.
I don't think, barring, I mean, anything happens these days. 5 years ago, I would have been like a definitive no, no, there is nothing.
Right.
These
Right.
days, I'm like, we are at I used this phrase yesterday and we were talking about an estimate for Academy. I think with this estimate, we have a very low risk profile of being over.
And I'm excited about the cassettes versus the wall units. I think that's a really good solution. So thank you. I think that's worth extra money to have that as a better outcome. Do they still have the same type of controls as the wall units?
Yeah, so the way we're running controls for this system is it's going to be standalone from our regular BMS that does everything else, which is okay. It's actually really simple to use. So the occupants will be able to select their temperature room by room with what's called deadband. So like say we say you could have 70 degrees plus, and you could go up to 72 and as low as 68, just so not
Yep.
fighting each other. And then there'll be a centralized control panel, usually put in like a custodial office, and you'll have global settings there. And that's where we could set schedules and things like that. But yes, they from a control standpoint, they work the exact same way.
Great. Thank you.
Are there other comments that anyone wanted to add about this area? I assume there'll be like regular revisiting of this budget and looking for changes, savings as we move forward, right?
Not, I mean, do you want me to get into next steps? I can kind of lay out what I think our
So,
next few things will be.
Sure.
So at this point, we have the bid set documents. Now, remember, we're doing this through a phased CM approach. We're not like taking the bid documents and putting the package out in the street like we would with a general contractor. So our next step is Nick and his team at Gilbane are working on our advanced procurement package. So that'll be a package that we hope will go out to bid, that Gilbane will bid on our behalf in probably April. That will be all our long lead time items, which is essentially the generator and the electrical switchgear. Most of the stuff that's going to be covered by the grant anyway, which is good. So that'll come before the committee first. So our hope is by our April meeting, we will be ready with the advanced procurement package. We'll have a rough value of what that package might be. And then also concurrently with that, Gilbane is working on a revised proposal for their general conditions. So if you recall, when the Board of Selectmen made the award to Gilbane back, I think it was last April or so, that was based on this long project duration and a much larger project. Now we've gone through the pre-construction phase. We're from that 27 million down to 18 million. We've got a much slimmer, more efficient project. So we're also going to be running this on a schedule where we're going to be working in an occupied building. The school has been really great with that. We're going to knock this out basically from June of 2026 through December 2026. A little bit of bleed over into the following year, maybe. So Gilbane is structuring their proposal for their general conditions. This is their on-site project manager. It's all the people you see in the trailer at the Neck River site. It's all of their work. So they're going to be putting that together. And so we'll have for our April meeting their revised proposal and also their advanced procurement package. If you guys are good with that, we'll get that out in the street. Then it'll come back when they get their bids back, and that'll be your first kind of action item. Hopefully May, maybe June will be the award of that contract, and then that'll go to the Board of Selectmen to award that pre-procurement package, and or advanced procurement package, and we could get that equipment ordered for next summer. Then when we get to the fall, we will start to bid out the rest. So what Gilbane is doing, they're taking this massive package that BL has put together, and they're chunking it out and bidding out all these separate pieces. So yes, the budget is always looked at. After we do this advanced procurement, we could look at it again and take that chunk out of it and say, okay, we thought it was going to be this much. It ends up being this much. That's good or bad. But for the most part, what you're looking at is the gross project budget. It's as conservative as possible. So I would expect that number to only get better over time, not worse.
Okay. And I appreciate, you describing going through with getting the multiple estimates and how close people were at that. So that does make me feel better too.
Right.
Okay.
So April will really be the action month, which I'm looking forward to.
All right.
Nick, anything to add on that? Did I get the kind of procurement side of it?
No, I think you hit it on the head. When we bid out the advanced procurement, that's a decent chunk of this overall, the percentage of this overall revised budget of 18 million. So that'll be a good indicator of, sort of where the market's at. Now that doesn't factor in labor, but labor tends to be a bit more consistent. So we are, not looking to start this work until 26, right? So there's a fair amount of time between now and then. So to your question earlier about, looking for ways to save or validating, I would think that, as we get closer to 26, we'd sort of just take a quick look at this and say, hey, based on the bids we've received since we posted this estimate in February, let's say it's December of 25, what bids have we received for jobs similar to this or with similar MEP systems, and what were the costs there? And just sort of, does it sort of pass the first look test? And if it doesn't, we can dig a little deeper. And if it does, all's well, we proceed forward. But as Ben mentioned, we built in the escalation.
Yeah.
But a year, solid year and 2 months or so from when we would probably take bids, or maybe more like a year and a month that we would take bids for the balance of this work. Yeah, I mean, a lot could happen in the market like in that time, right? If you were February of 2020, you wouldn't have thought that by October of 21, inflation would be such that these jobs would have no chance of succeeding. So
Right.
we certainly haven't factored that in, but
Sure.
we feel comfortable that barring anything crazy like a global pandemic, that we've accounted for those costs.
I think it's also just one last thing. I think it's important to note that there's a lot of, or a decent amount of contingency built into this project. So when you take the total, so the total cost without any of that stuff is about 14.6. But then on top of that, we have a 2.5% what's called a design contingency. That's 366,000. we have escalation of right around $900,000 built into that. So that's that cost escalation contingency. And we also have what's called CM contingency of 3%, which is 546 million or $546,000. So right there, that's, you know, $1.5 to $2 million of you know, risk management built right into this as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And on top of that, I think BL's team, since they've had a whole another look at this and we've revised so many different things, it's a lot tighter than I think most projects are at this stage.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've narrowed it down to the known unknowns. In other words, you've done such a good job of digging that you know what the variance was. So I'm just, what's going to be the biggest source? I mean, not fuel, would be fuel, not labor, probably fuel. Getting the equipment itself. I mean, what would be the source of an unexpected increase?
Good question. Fuel would impact this a little bit, but not as much as some of the other trades that, you know, site work and things like that would be impacted a lot more by fuel. Oil prices increasing. What we saw from the pandemic was a sharp spike in commodity pricing for metals. So copper, aluminum, you know, those alloys just absolutely went through the roof. You know, other than the sheet metal and the copper conductors, you know, we're on the lighter side of that. You know, the hits we saw with that were exterior metal panels around the outside of the building, like you may see along if you drive by Neck River, and then the extruded aluminum glazing systems, which, you know, we don't have on this one. So, you know, if we saw a similar outcome to what happened the last time with the price increases on metals, it's not gonna. I don't think it would derail the budget that we have.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Kristen, I just wanted to mention, Kristen's on the call. Anything from the design standpoint you wanted to add to the update here? Good.
I think from my end, are there questions?
No, anything from your end?
Yeah, no, I think to Ben's point on the auditorium side, I mean, we went to a holistic approach for it so that it's not a mix and match of, you know, new and existing. That you won't look at it and go, hey, we should have done this.
Yeah.
So adding in the stage, adding in the curtains, it's really going to change the space. And I think it's money well spent. And, you know, we tried to balance budget economics with giving you the biggest bang. So.
Right. And with the gym too, right? I mean, same feeling there as well.
Yeah.
Correct.
In the theater. Okay.
We also brought the school personnel in, Catherine and her team, some of the folks that are involved in athletics and involved in the theater classes, and they are psyched. I mean, like it was fun to meet with them, and we met with a couple of them a couple weeks ago that thought there was going to be all this stuff that they were going to have to ask for that wasn't included. We're like, oh no, we got that.
Oh, cool.
Good.
Yeah, it was, we did have to stop somewhere. Like, of course they wanted to do an adjacent space, and we're like, we're not doing that. You know, like we're not saying no, we're just saying not now. But it was cool to bring them in. And so the expectations at the school level mirror reality right now, which is always a good thing.
And I think, you know, based on past experiences at the high school with the gym and the theater, there was obviously cuts made there that people are still upset about. So if we can avoid things like that with this project, all the better.
Definitely.
So, okay. Any other comments before we move on to your next item or questions from anyone?
Good to go.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you, Ben. So that's your whole report, right? For then item 3, you got through them all.
Yeah, that's enough for one day.
That's enough for you. Okay. All right, great. Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. We'll look forward to more updates. So then the next item on the agenda is the approval of invoices. I'll just read through the invoices and then we can just vote on them all at once, Galen.
Sounds good.
So we have 4 invoices. The first to BL Companies, invoice number 2302234-9, $78,300 for professional services from November 30th, 2024 through December 27th, 2024. The second invoice is to BL Companies invoice number 23-02234-10 for $21,200 for professional services from December 28th, 2024 to January 31st, 2025. The third is to Silver Petroselli, invoice number 25-098, $600 for DHHS RTU replacement professional services through December 31st, 2024. And then the final invoice also to Silver Petroselli, invoice number 25259, $600 for Daniel Han High School RTU replacement professional services through January 31st, 2025. Any discussion or comments? Do I have a motion to approve the invoices as submitted?
Yep, so moved.
Okay, I'll second that. Any other discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, those invoices are approved. Thank you. The next item is public comment. Do we have any members of the public? It doesn't look like we have anyone online.
No, we
Cal?
don't.
Okay. All right, no public comment. Any closing remarks before we adjourn?
As always, I leave the meeting with more confidence than I went in. Thanks to Ben and the team. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
I agree. I second that. Thanks, Caitlin. Appreciate all that you're doing. I know it's quite a lot. All right, well then I'll go ahead and call to adjourn the meeting at 8:39.